Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Onyegolu. So after 2 weeks and an extra bonus day to come up with an agreement, or a fudge agreement as some have suggested, COP26 ended at the weekend. And now people around the world are digesting the results of that climate conference. Newspaper headlines have ranged from still on the road to hell, because not that many promises have been made, to climate deal for the world, which is clearly an attempt to look on the bright side. And though dozens of the countries signing on had expressed mixed feelings on the outcome, the climate pact was indeed adopted, representing a step forward in trying to keep 1.5 alive. Or does it? Well, to examine what's been agreed at COP26, I'm joined now in the studio by Arise correspondent Dan Warren. Good to see you, Dan. So what's the verdict on the result of this climate summit? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
I think it's thumbs like this, to be honest.
Thumbs somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, because, I mean, yesterday I think it summed it all when the COP26 President Alok Sharma called it a fragile win. I personally think that they needed to get something across the line, and even UN climate advisors were essentially saying, well, it's better than having no deal, and that's where it came from. I don't think anybody was. It was only the British Prime Minister yesterday, Boris Johnson, that was trying to make it sound like, you know, the world had been saved from disaster, but actually everybody else thinks it's better, it's in the right direction, but actually it's not where it needs to be. So
some progress, perhaps more than we've seen before, but not enough. What are the concrete things to take away from it? I mean, larger commitments from countries to reduce their emissions and a lot of focus on the so-called double F word, fossil fuels.
Yes, well, it's the first time coal has actually been sort of written into the deal in terms of reducing down as opposed to phasing out, so to speak. That is the key element. But I think that the problem is it hasn't been explained properly to many people as to why China and India were so adamant about not agreeing to withdraw coal fully. This is the problem. So many countries still rely on fossil fuels, and there isn't the technology or the infrastructure to replace it in the timescales that they've been talking about.
Well, I mean, you mentioned China, because of course lots of people would be forgiven for saying that it's never going to happen. No China, no India. So what needs to happen next with the science? I mean, we now know more about the dangers of what we are facing. Is the scientific argument won and it's just a matter of getting it over, or does science need to do more?
I think science needs to do more. I think technology needs to do more, because you can't suddenly say to a country like India and China, both over 1 billion people population. I mean, India, for example, 70% of its electricity is generated by coal. Basically, it was coal-powered electricity plants that took the country, or took a lot of people out of poverty. You can't suddenly say, well, you're going to have to go back in there, because the Western world has said you can't use fossil fuels. So what they need to do is invest and look at ways of how coal can burn more efficiently, because you're not going to be able to get the infrastructure in immediately, in effect, to rewire a whole country and power it on different sources. And in fact, some of these new sources they talk about don't even work. Like, for example, wind power in September in the UK was no good to anybody. So the fact is, you can't just keep having the Western or the developed countries dictate, and I think the problem is they need to listen more, and there needs to be billions more dollars pledged to help this.
Well, that's a very good point, and let's be clear that they are not saying, India for instance is not saying that it won't reduce or eliminate coal use. I mean, it's saying that it might take them a bit longer than countries in the West, and if you want them to do it faster, as you said, then help us. I mean, that seems fair enough, doesn't it?
Yes, and then it comes to, well, who's paying, how's it going to be paid, and I'd certainly be interested to be around the table during those negotiations, because, I mean, they're talking about $100 billion, this annual fund that has been talked about. Nobody's really come up with the table. The US were liked the idea in principle but couldn't agree to it. But other countries are saying it's got to be over $1 trillion in order to make the advances they need. So, and you can understand from the developing countries going, well, in their eyes, the Western world has pretty much caused this problem. Somebody else, well, they should help pay for it.
Yeah, but I mean, so in your assessment, does all this come down to the position of developing countries like India, for example, that reducing its ability to burn or sell coal would curb its growth? In other words, its economic growth. I mean, if it does that, there's going to be a knock-on effect. And that essentially encapsulates the dilemma for developing countries, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Because, for example, if India agreed to the terms that they wanted originally in the draft that almost went across the line, basically the Indian government would be saying to their citizens, we're going to put you back in poverty. That's not a vote winner at all. No government can do that. And that's the problem. Basically, you've got two countries that are heavily reliant on coal, that essentially their economy relies so much on it. You can't just suddenly go and, as I say, replace with other sources. They have to. The Western world has to help. They have to insist.
Well, I mean, they recognize that they have to help. The question is, beyond the words, let's see the money. As somebody would say, I think it was David Glencore, show me. You do vaguely remember Mr. Davis.
I do indeed. Yeah. Who could forget? No, but yeah, the fact is, it's a global dilemma, and they've got to now start working with, for example, the private sector to find out who can come up with this money. And of course, if the private sector can get involved, there's going to be huge tax reductions for global businesses. And not really, for example, John Kerry overseeing from the US side, not really a key element that Democrats potentially like is, tax reductions. It's a very big nightmare, but essentially, the weekend they got it across the line. It didn't look like it failed, but basically the 1.5 degrees centigrade. They're saying it's on life support. I think there's about to be a power cut.
I like that. But of course, the more they talk about that double F word, the fossil fuels, I mean, the more it kind of, because I mean, everybody's focusing on coal, but it's going to ultimately come down to things like oil and then gas and so on. And countries like Nigeria would then be in the firing line, wouldn't it?
Exactly. I mean, coal is the biggest problem, so hence that's why it's everyone's focus. But you're absolutely right. And basically more needs to be spent on easy, accessible, either how to burn off fossil fuels more effectively or to replace them completely, which as many scientists say, that's years away. I mean, the problem
that's unrealistic.
Exactly. The problem is so many years was spent investing in finance and actually not investing in the environment, and it's now a race against time. It really is.
So whether it's, I'm just looking at the language of that sort of deal, whether it's phasing out coal or phasing down coal, as you pointed out, it's the first time that there's been such text in any UN climate agreement since 1997. So is the fact that there is something at all in the deal about coal, should that be something worth celebrating, as the optimists suggest?
I think so. I mean, because it is the first time, and the fact is that India, as you rightly said, they haven't said they're not going to do it. It's just going to take them longer. 2070 was what they were saying. So the fact is, if every country, and this is the issue, if every country does what they say, then yes, it's successful. But if they don't, as the British Prime Minister said yesterday, you can't force sovereign nations to do what everybody else wants to do. And the fact is, if certain countries want to continue the way they are, nobody can arrest them. There's no way of policing it. So it's basically all on goodwill.
Dan, thanks very much indeed. Dan Warren, Arise correspondent there. That's it for this edition of the Arise interview. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and around the world, bye-bye and thank you for watching.